I'm going to share my slide deck. Good morning, everybody. Today's September the 3rd. This is the Technical Advisory Committee meeting to discuss the implementation of Senate Bill 25-002 is our primary focus today. Welcome, everybody. We have been working on this for a while, and we'll kind of go through the standard housekeeping items, and then we will go through where we are with rulemaking 1, and then we've got some new things to show for rulemaking 2. Just for a real quick look at the agenda, and I'm assuming everybody can see this. If not, please let me know. We'll talk about the ground rules for the public. Again, we'll talk about the resource page. Then we'll review the final draft of the rules for rulemaking 1. And then we'll look at rulemaking 2, and then, like I mentioned, options for regional codes, and then we'll go into next steps. First, we want to welcome Wayne. Wayne Griswold is our newest TAC member. We filled the slot for emergency services or management. Wayne is the principal fire protection engineer at Terp Consulting. Wayne, I didn't see you pop in. Were you able to? Let me see if he's in.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I just joined via phone. I'm trying to connect online as well. But yeah, thanks for the introduction and happy to be a part of it.
Anything you want to say to the group?
Not particularly, just other than that, I'm excited to get involved, and it sounds like I've got a little bit of catching up to do, but excited to do that. And if there's anybody that has any specific questions on my background and kind of where I fit into this, I'm an open book, so happy to be a part of it, and thanks for the consideration.
Well, welcome, Wayne. We actually met with Wayne last week and kind of gave him a rundown of where we are and what was in front of us. So we recommended he watch a couple of the back TAC meetings to get him up to speed. Thanks for participating. Ground rules for the public, as just to let you know, we appreciate your participation. This is an important statutory process. We recommend typing your hands into the chat or virtually. I have a number of co-hosts with me today. Heather Hopwood, Donnie Featherman, and Michelle Goulet are all co-hosts. They're going to be watching that chat feature, and for folks that raise their hands so that we can make sure we address your questions. If time gets short, we will give priority to TAC members, and any written comments you have can be sent to me at sam.albrecht@state.co.us. Just a resource page, especially for folks that may be new to the group. The actual bill itself can be, and these slides will be up on the website in a couple days, just as soon as we get the download of the recording ready to go. But the actual text of the bill is linked there, and it's also linked on that last link there, the Technical Advisory Committee website, so that you can see that statute if you want to see it. We also wanted to provide links to our statute from which the rules are tied to, and it's Colorado Revised Statute 2432, 3301 through 3329. The administrative rules we're actually talking about, there's also a hot link to that, and then the Building Codes and Standards website. Yes? Did I hear a question? Okay. Rulemaking 1. There's been one slight revision to this schedule. We are having a stakeholder meeting on September the 11th. That is where we will actually look at the red line of the rules before we file them with the Secretary of State. If anything comes up at that meeting, we'll also have time to talk through it at the September 17th TAC meeting. September 30th is the actual deadline for us to file that notice of the final proposed rules. So we'll have time to make another iteration of this, but right now we think we're in really good shape with the red line for rulemaking 1, and the rest of the dates will fall through as they are here on this slide, and the target date is to go into effect with the permanent rules on December 30th. All TAC members are welcome to attend that September 11th meeting if you want to. If not, I know we take up a lot of you guys' time already. We will report back to the September 17th TAC. Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Could you send a link to that September 11th meeting?
I will.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the schedule? Okay. So where we are with rulemaking 1 content, as you know, we're down to 2 primary items. One is to provide the modification to allow multiple qualified individuals, registered or certified installers under one business entity. And that's the bulk of the change. And then, of course, implementing the single exit in certain multifamily structures. That's the other piece. Everything else in Senate Bill 25-002 will be carried forward to rulemaking 2. Again, rulemaking 1 summary, just an update. We did decide to keep put in definitions for certified business entities. We'll go through that just a little bit today, and we'll talk about the fees. The fees will be same as for a single installer. We also provided some clarifying language for installers that can't complete an installation. And we are going to look at like I already mentioned, the business entity installer registration. We'll clarify we have language in there for clarifying the expiration of insurance, financial surety, and registration dates, and then the single exits in certain multifamily structures. And then we've worked out a proposal for the installer certifications for Class IBC multifamily structures. That's a little bit a change there, so we want to make sure everybody is good with that, and that business entities that have qualified certified installers. So that's kind of the layout of the rulemaking on this for rulemaking 1. With that, we're going to just jump right into it. I'm going to kind of roll through here. It is in the slide deck that was sent out. I'll note any changes here. We have started to get some feedback now, which is great. And I've got notes here, for example, in this first one, where chapter 1 is definitions in our administrative rule, and we added some red line to 1.6. And we did just get some comments back, and we are going to take a look at that. So this language might tweak somewhat as far as the final set of rules. If the comments, it wasn't opposed to it, it was just a clarification of the wording that we used. So basically, this allows the business entity to be, that's doing installation work, that they may become certified, right? And it means that all qualified individual installers are certified because a business entity has to be present during the installation. The next definition is 1.19, the installer. It means that the person that's registered by the Division of Housing as an individual or registered person conducting installations on behalf of themselves or a registered business entity. This individual is responsible for the direct on-site supervision of the installation as defined in Rule 1.10. Any questions on the definitions? That's the only 2 that we're looking at changing. Okay. Chapter 2 is the codes and standards section of the administrative rules. This one we've talked about. This ties back to the number of access doorways in the IBC. And so we added some text there for that, and this is not new. We did get a comment. Tim actually had some clarifying language that we want to take a look at, and we may or may not incorporate, but it does not change the intent. It just clarifies, so we'll probably go with that. And that is, so are there any other questions on the single exit stairwell modification to the IBC?
No.
Okay. Chapter 3 is the fees. We just are adding some clarifying language in red there that the installer may be the individual or the business, and it's $250 for that. And we are bound by statute for installer registrations at $250. All right, then we jump all the way down to chapter 6, which is the installer part of the administrative rules. And 6.24, this is where I was talking about the clarification. If the installer cannot complete an installation, the installer or the registered or certified installer business entity must notify the division within 5 business days with the name of the new qualified installer and request a new installation authorization. The new qualified installer becomes the installer of record and must complete the installation, accepting full responsibility for the installation and any corrections if required. Oh, I see some, let me scroll down in my chat here a little bit. Okay, thanks for putting in the link on the September 11th meeting. It's in the chat now. Any question on 6.2.4?
Sam, this is Nate. I apologize. I can't figure out where the hand raise thing is.
Okay, not a problem, Nate. Just jump in.
Okay. Is defined cannot complete, meaning is this like, when these things unfold historically, they drag out, right? And at some point you cross some line according to 624 that you cannot complete. But where is that line? Like, if an installer is supposed to install on a Monday and he finds out on Friday the crane can't be there, is it he cannot complete? I'm not saying that should be it, but I'm saying that could be it. So like what defines the moment at which they decide cannot complete?
So I guess we could clarify it a little more, Nate, if you think we need to. We're most concerned if the installer leaves the job, right, and can't get it done in case
Abandons the job, basically. It's what we deal with. Yeah.
In case of death, in case we're not talking about a snowstorm or a blizzard. We're not talking about a sprained ankle where they can't get up there, but if they break a leg and they can't get on site to supervise that installation, then I would think that would be the trigger to let us know that they can't do it and they're going to give that job to somebody else.
I think having this record of that is just fine.
I'm sorry?
I think just having the record of how you explained it is just fine. These meetings are part of it, so that's fine.
Cool. Good point, though, Nate. I'm glad you brought that up. Anybody else have any questions on that? Okay. We're jumping down into 6.2 now, and this is stuff that you guys have seen before. 6.10.2 is that a business entity may register for their business to conduct installations for manufactured homes and tiny homes. We have talked here about a business registering as a qualified employee or employees conducting installations in 610.2.1. And in 6.10.2.2, we talk about that the name of the business name for business entity registration must include the name of the individuals. Any questions on this part? Like I said, I think we've been through this once before. Okay. I will say that if we, like I mentioned, if we get comments at the stakeholder meeting, which went out to close to 3,000 people, I think, the notification of that meeting, we won't get 3,000 people there, but for those that care, we do try to be as comprehensive with our stakeholder list as possible. And then if we get comments back or concerns, will bring those back to the full TAC on the 17th. I don't foresee anything other than slight twists in the language or clarification language being done on these red lines.
Hey, Sam, this
Yep.
is Wayne. Just
Hey, Wayne.
a point of clarification for me. So
Yep.
is this language that we're reviewing, this has all been effectively vetted by this group? Is that fair to say? Or is there
Yeah,
significance to the
it
red?
has, and we've
Okay.
met with certain of the installers. We've met with Rocky Mountain Home Association and Matt Mitchell, who's our installer rep on the TAC, and we've gone through this language. This is something the community has been asking for quite a while, and it was able to be added to Senate Bill 25-002 as a amendment to the bill that was originally submitted. And so we were happy to be able to get that and then try to get it in place quickly.
Fair enough. Thank you for the clarification.
You bet. Good question. Okay. The next one, we talk a little bit more about we're still in 610, which is the registration section of of chapter 6. And we talk about the business accounts. And we talk in 2.3 and in 2.4 that business owners must notify us within 30 calendar days when a registered employee has been terminated or is no longer with the business, or if the business ceases to exist. And then in 2.5, we talk about marking those inactive when any item in 10.2.2 expires, or if an application has not been submitted. And then 610.3, we clarify that no installations should occur or shall occur after the expiration of any of the following: the letter of credit, the surety bond, CD, liability insurance, or DOH registration. We're tying everything to the same date. If one thing expires, installations need to stop until we get that rectified. And 3.1, we talk about that a little bit more and say, that they can only continue if we've got a renewal application in process with everything covered by the dates that are on the documents. And then our recommendation, which we've talked about before, is to try to line everything up to the same expiration date, so you have a real good reminder of what that that you need to re-register with the Division of Housing. Our system sends out reminders on a regular basis. Matt Mitchell says it's not that hard to try to get all the registration, the expiration dates the same. But again, it's not that is just a recommendation. All right, so then we're jumping into 612.3, 612, which is the certification part of chapter 6. And we modified the qualification for multifamily structures, and that is to submit evidence. The black, of course, is the existing text, and the red is the addition or change. I did not put in the strike-through version in this. This is the way it will read in the final. But that the person applying, the qualified individual applying for certification must submit evidence of the installation of a total of 15 multifamily dwelling units and representing no less than 2 multifamily buildings completed with 18 months to the division. As you know, I believe the certification for single family is 5 units. And so we tweaked the language in this for multifamily structures. We actually want to see 15 units, completed dwellings, and 2 different buildings. Does that make sense to everybody? Tawny?
Thanks,
You good?
Sam. Yeah, I sent an email to Donnie, and I think you're CC'd on it as well. Just changing the wording a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Just moving the 18 months to the end of the sentence.
Okay.
But anyway, I mean, so you all can look at that and see which one you like better. I just threw that out there as a suggestion.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, so that doesn't again change the intent, but it may clarify the readability of it, and I do appreciate that. I noticed someplace earlier that I had division with a lower case d, and I've got to go back and fix that. Any other questions on this change? Okay. So this then talks about that the business entity pursuing certification must provide evidence that all registered installers registered with the business meet the requirements and successfully complete the certification inspection. I'm going to check this word, the certification inspection, and maybe the certification requirement in Rule 6.13. And once the business entity is certified, I'm looking at 2.1 now, it may register a new installer with the business entity and maintain certification status as long as the newly registered person completes their certification within 180 days. And in 2.2, the registered qualified installer within the business entity, certified business entity, will be required to have their installations inspected by the division or one of its approved installation inspectors until that individual is certified. Okay.
Hey, Sam, just real quick.
Yep, Donnie.
I was just thinking about this, the 613.2.1, the 180 days. For multifamily, I'm thinking we might have to change that date of 180 days because we give them 18 months to certification, but now it's 180 days to get that same person certified. So I think we have to look at that and make sure that the days align.
Yep, we need to align those dates. Thank you for catching that. Tawny?
I just wanted to add, I don't know that we ever addressed the continuing education piece for business entities.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we talked about it, just maintaining it the same, that the business entity is not the one that's doing the continuing education. It's going to be the individuals. So the individual requirements remain the same. So whoever's registering under that business entity would still follow the same steps that they normally would.
Yeah, I wonder if it's worth clarifying under the continuing education requirements.
Yeah, well, we'll take a look at that.
Yep. Yeah, the way I would look at that too is that the qualifying individuals must have their CE in order to continue with their certification or registration status. Okay. Any other questions on Chapter 6 for business entities? All right. let's jump to rulemaking 2. So everybody has seen this slide, effective date of June 30th of 2026. That's our hard date by statute. So we are, there's nothing here that has changed, but I just wanted to flash that up again. And it's a resource for not only the TAC members, but anybody else that wants to know what schedule we're looking at. The content and rulemaking 2, we've got to talk about the local, the regions and the design criteria and what might work. We still need to work out the local government inspections, the process for the third-party plan approval for manufacturers, allowance for DOH to use a third party for final plan review or approval, audit process for plan approvals, inspections, seller contracts, and verification of down payment protection. Responsible parties is on the list. Contractor registration and education. And then we also kicked wildland fire and accessibility down a little bit as necessary if we need to revisit those. We know we need to go back and look at wildland fire and what we need to adopt. Some of these I think are going to be fairly easy to do, and we're going to start now. Once we get rulemaking 1 filed, we're going to start working, and certainly before the September 17th TAC meeting, we're going to start working on some proposals for how we think some of this might lay out. The big lift here, as everybody knows, is the regional zones and the design criteria and how we implement that. So I've got some updates a little later in the program here, but we have been working on this in the background, and we're about ready to roll some of that out to the TAC. So I want to show a concept. I want everybody to shift gears, and we're going to focus now on the regional design codes, and it's a concept for discussion, and it's we've looked at it internally in a couple of different ways in a table format, but I think the best thing to do is just kind of lay out the concept and get you guys feedback on if this would be worthwhile to consider. And I'm hoping to generate some discussion here, right? What if we just look at the basics first and set radon, sprinklers, and wildfire mitigation to the side for just a second? And what if we just look at wind, snow, and thermal? And there's 2 parts of this. One is the thermal zone, and then the other is the wind and snow zone, snow loads. And so one of the things that we had talked about is the making everything a thermal zone 7 for all of Colorado. Donnie, you had some, and Donnie really helped out on this part. You said there's a couple areas of the state that are not currently thermal zone 7.
Yeah, there's I believe 4 down in the southeast corner of Colorado that are climate zone 4. The rest of Colorado is going to be 5, 6, and 7. But looking at the IECC, the construction type that you're looking at in those categories would be almost exactly the same.
Okay. I would like to hear from the manufacturers and some of the other TAC members if they think it's too much of an overbuild to make everything a thermal zone 7.
The only comment I would have is that how much of the state is thermal zone 7? I think it's like Leadville, right?
That's a Butte, Leadville.
Yeah. I mean, do we really want to build to that when there's 2?
Summit County's is thermal zone 7 too, and I think part of Steamboat.
Okay. But yeah, that's my only question is and maybe somebody architect could speak to how different the requirements are and how much you think that might cost to adopt all 7.
This is Robbie Schwartz with Built Tank. Climate zoned now in the 2021 IECC, climate zones 4 through 7 are almost exactly the same. They all require R60 attic. They all require 20 plus 5 or the other options for walls. They really are almost exactly the same. There are a couple subtleties that are different, and unfortunately, I don't have the code book in front of me to tell you those. But for the big assemblies, they are pretty much the same.
Okay, thanks, Robbie. Tracy?
I mean, an R60 in 192 square feet for a tiny house is ridiculous.
Yeah, remember we did the study where you can trade it off using the performance approaches and the prescriptive trade-off methodologies. And we demonstrated that you can meet those requirements.
So,
With a 2x6 rafter, because we don't have attics.
Well, I believe we used a 2x6 rafter. We used your, I don't know if it was you who gave me the set of plans, but we did a res check analysis and building performance approach analysis. And we were able to get them to comply with little to no change in your specifications.
That was to get it to an R30. And that was based off of 2018 IRC. When you and I reran it, because we ran it twice, we ran it for 2018 and then for giggles, we did it for 2021, and we missed it by a hair for 2021 because of the additional requirements. And we only hit it for the 2018 based off of the ResNet. But that was at an R, 30, I think it was like, I think we ended up at like an R34 or something in the roof. So as soon as you guys say R60, I mean, that in tiny house world, that just smashes us.
Yeah. So, but remember the performance approaches and the ResCheck prescriptive trade-off methodology allows you to trade off that R60. That's the R60 comes from the prescriptive R value table. It doesn't say that you have to use that. It says that's your starting point, and then you can trade off from that.
Right.
If the analysis on the 2021 showed that it was just missing it, it would mean that you'd have to do something more in another location in order to trade off to that, typical R30 in the attic of a tiny home. But what I'm ultimately getting at is that the climate zones, if you look at the R value table, and maybe somebody can pull it up in the free codes link there, in the 2021 IECC, you'll see that the R values in climate zones 4 through 7 are not substantially different from each other.
So do I conclude with just every single tiny house that ever gets built, whether it's a DIY or a small builder, they're literally going to have to run ResNet every single time?
If they
not ResNet. ResNet is a private modeling service. ResCheck is an energy modeling, free energy modeling approach that is often used. So probably yes.
Wow.
So a region 7, so what I'm hearing is that a region 7 would be a negative impact to tiny homes with the way that if we were to move forward with that.
I mean, absolutely. I don't think anybody has even done any of the testing on the houses. The fact that we are using, higher insulation values, we are sealing the houses better. The mini splits are overpowered for the zone, the amount of square footage that they're designed for. And so we lost 2 inches in the tiny houses, became more top heavy, increased insulation values to meet all of the new requirements. And now we're saying we're going to go from an R30 to an R60. So yeah, that's definitely pretty impactful for the industry.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, I think it's being misrepresented, however, because you don't have to go from an R30 to an R60. And if you chose climate zone 5 as the statewide average of what we are, which is perfectly fine, you're going to see that it's still in the prescriptive R value table. Your starting point is basically the same R value. So all I'm saying is that Donnie's suggestion of using climate zone 5, 6, or 7 as a statewide average for manufactured homes to make it a simpler understanding for manufacturers across that are coming to the state and in the state is not a bad idea, but because it just doesn't matter.
Other folks with their hands up, Donnie, and then Dean, then Sean.
Actually, Sam, I was before Sean, but I'll let
Oh,
Sean go
okay.
ahead.
But yeah, just real quick. So like, Robbie was saying that the baseline is what's in the table, right? It says like, hey, if you don't want to do all the calculations or you don't want to do any trade-off here, you just need to do this at a minimum. But if you want to go that extra effort and say like, hey, I can't put a R60 in the roof, but I can put maybe a higher insulation value in the walls and the floors, that will allow you to reduce the amount of insulation in the attics or the roof rafter spaces so that you can still all together meet the minimum code requirements for your thermal envelope, right? But the one thing I did want to add is that the thermal zone 7, the one thing that we need to consider if we did something like that is that in the actual climate zone 7 application, we have to consider ERVs and HRVs. So I don't think we want to enforce that on all of the structures, but I guess if the structure was to go into a true climate zone 7 location, that we do have to take that into consideration. So if it went, let's say we did say like, hey, everything complies with a thermal zone 7 thermal envelope requirement, and it went to a thermal zone 6 area, we wouldn't enforce them to have a HRV or ERV system in that structure. But if it did go to a climate zone 7, we would have to take that into consideration and say like, hey, it's in a climate zone 7 where the code actually requires a ERV or HRV system. Okay. But again, if you look at the table, and I can pull that up, or I can send it to Sam in a quick chat real quick, so he can pull it up on his screen. But you'll see on the table when you look down, like the wall insulations, and the floor insulation, the attic space or ceiling insulations, they're almost exactly the same. Now, some of the things that we're talking about is if we did it all climate zone 7, there wouldn't be a big change from climate zone 4 to 5, but there's really no change from 5 to 7. So you could either do like a climate zone 7 altogether, or possibly just split it to 2. You have a climate zone 4 for those 4 jurisdictions that are southeast, and then everything else is climate zone 7. Depending on how you want to set that up. But there's multiple ways to do it. This is just a suggestion of like, hey, there's not much of a big change in the minimum insulation values for those climate zones. So we kind of just threw it out there as an idea, right? But if you want, I can pull up that table just so you can take a look at it, or I'll send it to Sam. So since he's sharing his screen, he might be able to pull that up so that everybody can take a look at that table and see that there's not much of a difference. Okay.
Why don't you put it in the chat, Donnie? We'll see where we get. Dean?
Okay.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. So I wanted to just, before getting into the weeds of the specific design criteria for these different climate zones, just wanted to point out for the general group's edification that I was looking up here. There are 13 counties in Colorado that are already in climate zone 7. However, of those 13 counties, that represents, I used AI for help here, but that's roughly 15% of Colorado's land area. So I guess at a high level, regardless of what the design criteria are, why would we want to use the 15th percentile design criteria for the entire state? That seems unusual to me. The other side of that coin, aside from that argument, is Donnie started to touch on this. Our values are one piece of this equation, but the difference between any of these climate zones from a design perspective have a significant impact on the MEP designs of these buildings. So, I mean, he talked about HRV and ERV in a climate zone 7 that maybe wouldn't be required. So now we're getting into the land of exceptions. So we'll say, okay, everything's climate zone 7, but then we're going to have all these exceptions. It's not just HRV and ERV. It's literally the sizing of mechanical equipment for different climate zones. So you can imagine in climate zone 7, I can make the argument that I do not need air conditioning at all. And in fact, we don't provide air conditioning on multi-million-dollar homes in some of these high climate zone areas. But can you imagine if you took that same mentality because you're meeting the code and put that house in Kit Carson, Colorado? It would not work. So from a design perspective, we actually are barred by ASHRAE from over designing a heating system or over designing an AC system. So I have strong concerns about putting a design criteria for an extreme condition for cold, but not for heat on that for those reasons.
Okay, Dean, thanks. Mo?
That was some great points that Dean just raised. I was wondering about that myself. Thank you, Dean, for articulating it so well. Yeah, we have to be careful about simplifying for one extreme and then creating a complication for the other end of the spectrum, right? Since we have a very diverse state geographically and climatically. But going back to what Tracy had raised, the tiny home equation as well is an important one. It would make sense, whatever ideas we can. Remember, once again, these are all thoughts. This is all very much draft form to get the conversation started because we have not been able to get much input from the outside world. So we're going to start throwing things out there just to see how you guys react, to have robust conversation about it, and then start to work our way and navigate the different thoughts and ideas in response to that. So just keep that in mind, right? Nothing today is bait, right? With that being said, the other thing we got to keep in mind for tiny homes, which I think was raised at the last meeting, is the high mobility of them, right? So there's going to be some trade-offs here, Tracy. So I want you in the industry to think hard about what those trade-offs would be and what makes sense, addressing mobility to be able to make sure they're accepted by as many regions or jurisdictions as possible, but at the same time keeping it practical as well. So just throwing out that challenge or homework for you guys as well.
Thanks, Mo. And you said it more eloquently than I did. But yeah, this is just a concept to generate some discussion. We're not, the staff is not going to recommend this without a lot more discussion. And Tracy, you do a good job of standing up for the tiny home industry. And sometimes that keeps me grounded. And I appreciate your input on that. Sean Roos?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out there, I know as we adopt different code sets and different things like that, is there anything making, when we go to this regional concept, let's say codes change and all of a sudden Zone 7 has much greater insulation requirements, say in a 2027 IRC or IECC code or something like that, would we have the ability to then come back to this and change it to adapt for maybe over requirements or anything like that?
So Sean, that's a good question. And that is one of the nightmares I'm having right now. And it goes a little bit beyond that, but yes, we can change our administrative rules as we see fit. And Mo put a thumbs up in the chat. And it's my concern also is if we start seeing a local jurisdiction raise or lower their local design criteria, how do we keep track of that as we take a look at our design, our regional zone or our regional areas that we're trying to do? Do we have to, if a jurisdiction bumps up wind load and snow load, do we have to go back and change our regional zoning to accommodate that because now it's the most stringent, or how we work that? So I'm going to try and spend some time thinking.
I'm gonna, if you don't mind, interrupt a little bit on that one. I think we're making this a little more complicated. This is why the statute was changed to consolidate it under the state program to address this very issue. So once we come up with regional codes, that is now the state requirement. There are no more local jurisdiction requirements. If they change anything at that point moving forward, it would just impact site-built structures. With that being said, we of course want to be good partners and be in constant communication with local governments about what their needs are, and if things have evolved for any reason, does it make sense then to revisit our process? Another reason why we didn't bake all this in statute, because if we had baked all this in statute, it'd be much harder to change, right? So that's why it's through a rulemaking process. But I have to disagree with Sam's comment from earlier. It does not mean we have to accommodate every change, because local jurisdiction then becomes more stringent for that zone. The idea is once we establish it, whatever those requirements are, the most stringent requirements will be applied for that region by us, not by local governments. So I just want to make sure that's clear to everybody.
Good. Thank you, Mo. I think we're going to go to Tracy again and then Tim.
Oh, we got Sean first up there.
Sean, you still have your hand up?
Sorry.
That's okay.
No, put it down.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Tracy?
So a couple things. I do appreciate the reminder of the cumulative totals for ResCheck. I get it. Looking at the tables, because we're already doing like an R34, but once you start to get to this R38 in the floor, we're going to have to re-engineer trailers, right? Because we're already maxing out, at a 6-inch cavity and filling it with closed cell. So just understand just a couple of percent, points here. It might not feel drastic in a lot of cases, but if we got to go re-engineer trailers, that's just like a really big deal for us. So I will say I do appreciate the cumulative totals, because we smashed the walls and the floor out of the water, whereas we always struggle with the roof, right? Because we have height restrictions, because we have code, right? And so I just throw that out there as that reminder. And then Sam, I feel like, does square footage matter in this point? I don't know if I'm stuck in this other meeting in my head, but are these manufactured homes that are 800 square feet and 1200 square feet? I mean, they're different than 400 square feet and less. Do we need to start differentiating on some of this, or I don't want to complicate it, but it just feels, a little overkill for the tiny houses.
Right, Tracy, I'm in some of those same meetings with you, so I understand that concern. We are bound by statute on what statute says. It might get to a point where we need to differentiate. I mean, our definition, the state statute defines tiny homes as 400 square feet or less, and it creates them as a different building type than a modular or a HUD code home. But right now we're trying to find a solution that works for everybody. And it's not an easy solution. Tim? And Nate, I hear, I see you in the chat. I'll get to you in just a second.
All right, thank you. 2 comments. One, Dina made some valid comments from the mechanical sizing standpoint, and with the potential of what that would impact go into a climate zone 7. Would just point out, just as a reminder to the group, that the energy code and the residential code, so to speak, do not require any cooling, just that basic heat requirement of, I think it's 68 degrees. So, but most places, most designs we see provide the manual JD&S showing the cooling, and there are the limitations of, what you can oversize. My second comment would be the 2024 IECC has reduced the attic insulation down. I know we're talking about the 21, but I think they made a very good change, reducing from the R60 down. I think it's down to the R49 for a couple of reasons. One is ability of half-inch drywall to handle that potential weight, and there were some other reasons, but those are just 2 comments. Thanks.
Yeah, Tim, I had heard that the 24 IECC backed off a little bit on that roof insulation, and that might be something that we also need to factor in. Nate, I'm going to go to you, and then I see Donnie.
A couple points. One is on the Tracy on the tiny home side. This is also an outcome of trying to create a category of IRC code townhomes, and unfortunately, what that means is that we have to comply with the IRC to be able to build a tiny home in that category. And if somebody doesn't want to build to that category and have an R30 in their ceiling, well, then they can go build it to the ANSI code or no code at all, or however they've been doing it. And so there is a higher bar that was set by the tiny home bill creating the IRC code townhome. And so this is just kind of, I think, a little bit of what that looks like. The other thing I kind of wanted to say was on the side of Climate Zone 7, but more just from a bigger picture of this is going to be like the hardest thing we have to do on this committee, because one, we've been told to do this by the legislature, right? But the fact is that what we're trying to do doesn't fit into building code, right? And so on these calls, when everybody, kind of defaults to, oh, well, this isn't allowed in this code and this isn't allowed in that code. Well, that's why we're here, because we don't have a way to standardize. And so we're literally writing the book on how to do this. And so just be aware of that as we talk through, not being able to just cite, oh, well, the code doesn't allow that. Well, we know that already. And the last thing is, and this is actually maybe a little bit more of a question for Mo and Megan, is I know there was a lot of talk during the bill process about, are we simply going to just go with the highest common denominator on all of these code categories, right? So, Climate Zone 7 is the highest, so let's just standardize on that. Well, then, do we standardize on 160 mile an hour wind because that's the highest available as well? And I know the answer to that is no, but we have to realize that there will be places in Colorado that don't get what their current code is. And I just want to kind of clarify that, like, is that okay for us to say, and like, Don, I'll just, I know you, so I'll just kind of say, like, is it okay if this committee decides that Summit County gets 110-pound snow load across the board?
Right.
And
Yeah,
Don,
that's my question. That's my
and Don has 140-pound snow load, or do we have to meet everyone's criteria? Is that what we're trying to do? Or are we able to agree that some people are getting lower just to be able to average the buckets out? So anyway, I'll leave that there. So.
Okay, I want to go to Donnie and then iPhone and then Mo.
Yeah, just real quick, Nate, I don't think that's the intent, and that's why we're trying to create zones, right? We're not trying to create one zone. We're trying to create zones so we have the ability to, design multiple different type of structures. So I don't think that was ever the intent to create the most stringent building ever to exist, right? But to be able to create different products that fit different areas around Colorado, but in larger areas, right? So the regions. But I just wanted to raise my hand real quick because I did put the chart in the chat. So you should be able to click on it and open it up, and it'll pop up in another little window. But if you take a look at the chart itself, and just remember, we're talking about thermal zones. So when we're saying like, hey, if we did a thermal zone of 7 as a zone, we can either do it across the board, or if we broke it up into 4, 5, 6, and 7, like the code is already broken up, that's a possibility as well. But as you see through all the different thermal zones, all the insulation values are the same, right? Or there's a slight change between 4 to 7, I believe, in there. I have to open it back up again. But you'll see that there's very little difference between Climate Zone 4 all the way to 7, right? Wall insulations for wood frame is 20+5 for all categories, or a 13+10 continuous for all categories, or a 0+15, except when you get into Climate Zone 7, there's a 0+20, right? So you don't have to do the 0+20. You still have 20+5, 13+10. So there's a slight difference there from the 0+15 to the 0+20 in Climate Zone 6 and Climate Zone 7 and 8, right? We don't typically see mass wall installations for modular construction, at least at the factory. Now, I guess there could be a situation where that does occur, but I just don't see that happening unless I think the only mass walls we might see would be for like a bathroom group for a state park bathroom, but those are unheated, uninsulated buildings. Floor insulation, there's a difference between 4 and 5, and then 6 and 7. So there's a slight difference there. But the, let's see here, basement walls, pretty much the same across the board, except from 4 to 5. But that, like I said, it's just an idea to start the conversation. Like, hey, you know, based on the tables, there's slight differences, but they're essentially almost the same. But we can break them up to further zones. But we just want to, you know, bring it up to like, hey, this is just an idea.
Right. Okay, Donnie, thanks. I want to note that we have some more discussion that may help us focus on some of this, and that is the next couple of bullets when we look at wind and snow load that is on the slide now. Robbie, I think you were on the iPhone, and are you shopping at Home Depot or Walmart? Or
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm getting ready for the Colorado Building Symposium, so sorry I can't meet on my computer, but on my phone.
No, that's
I
fine.
was and this discussion has helped clarify for me, but I was trying to figure out why we're wanting to go, why we aren't just having people design for the climate zone that where the unit's going to be delivered to, and which would seem to make sense to me for the majority of manufactured housing other than housing that is on wheels. And it seems like we could make a distinction for houses that could be moved, that those houses have to meet a single climate zone or single criteria, but everything else gets built to their, you know, where that unit is going to be housed, especially if it's going to be put on a traditional foundation. You know, that unit isn't going to be moving, so why require it to be in climate zone 7 when it actually was being placed in climate zone 4 in the southeast part of the state? Whereas, you know, unfortunately for the tiny home folks, you know, those things can move. So you do almost have to design it to the worst case scenario. So that was my thought. Thank you.
Robbie, thanks for that. And I will clarify that we're spending a lot of time on residential, right? But the bill is very clear. It's all factory built structures, right? So it's non-residential, it's relocatable, it's tiny homes, and it is modular. So we have to think about all those different building types as we move forward with our proposed solution. Mo?
So much has been shared since I initially raised my hand. I don't know where to start anymore. I'll start with Robbie's comments since they were the most recent one. Robbie, that's the challenge before us because of this bill. It's an opportunity and a challenge. The idea is to go away from what you just described for these off-site constructed products that therefore taking advantage of economies of scale to produce more instead of constantly producing one unit per specific address over and over again. It just doesn't really take advantage of the opportunity of the economies of scale that this type of production can provide. So that's the idea behind this. That's why we're being asked and challenged by the legislative branch to come up with a simpler process that's not address specific, even if they're going on a permanent foundation, but to really condense as much as possible into regions, right? And therefore, and then therein lies the challenge that we're faced with. So that's the concept behind the bill we're trying to implement, the overarching concept. Now jumping to what Nate had brought up before earlier about the most stringent requirement. With that being said, the idea is not to find the most stringent and build around that. The idea is, you know, a regional approach, because visually that would be helpful too, but that may not work out that way. It's just take like like jurisdictions and package them together. And when we create a package saying, okay, that group will meet the most stringent of those requirements in that group, right? Hopefully they'll be so close to each other, that's not going to matter. That's the idea behind it. If there are some extreme outliers that doesn't make sense to package with anybody, then they would be their own region if we decide to go that route. Ultimately, it's up to this group to make that decision. And of course, it has to be signed off by the State Housing Board. But keep that in mind. There is some flexibility here, but the idea is to condense as much as possible to a handful of code requirements versus what we're dealing with right now, which is 300 plus requirements scattered all over the state, right? And to help us with that, and Sam will get this at some point, we are hiring a group, a consultant group, to help have those conversations with local jurisdictions about how did you come up with these requirements for your jurisdiction? Why do they make sense for your jurisdiction? And do they make sense for the whole jurisdiction or just parts of it, right? And then as we start to create regions, it may not encompass a whole jurisdiction cleanly in a region, right? It may be parts of it in different regions. And so we have to think this is going to be incredibly complicated, and it's going to involve multiple iterations. But the idea is for it to be simplified as much as possible. We're not going to be able to accommodate every single need out there, right? We're going to have to simplify as well. And then going back to the tiny home conversation that Nate brought up, I think Robbie, you as well, we have to be careful here. Yes, they can go back to whatever RV standards that they're building to, et cetera. But we're talking about safety for consumers in Colorado who want something for long-term occupancy. If they want something for long-term occupancy, there's only one game in town. It's through this body, right? Through the state. Anything else is not deemed appropriate for long-term occupancy because it's either certified by an RV to an RV standard or not certified at all, right? So keep that in mind. We want to be coming up with something that's also practical for this group that is unique. They are built smaller, to Tracy's point. Are there advantages there we could take advantage of, so to speak, to make it simpler for them, but still come up with a safe product that is code compliant, that we've determined to be code compliant and therefore readily deployable to multiple jurisdictions. It's going to be a hard needle to thread with them because of their high mobility, but we also want to break that industry, but making it so cost burdened to produce one, it doesn't make any sense. And now everybody's just using or purchasing those products that aren't designed for long-term occupancy, but using them as such, which is not good for those consumers either. So this is going to be a lot of trade-offs here in balancing act that we got to do, but therein lies a challenge before us, but it comes with a huge opportunity. But make no mistake, it's not going to be easy.
Thanks, Mo. Charlie, and then Don.
Okay, couple questions and then a suggestion. One question is, how many zones are we trying to get to? Like right now there's 300. Do we have a target?
Yeah. So the target is less than 300. And we don't have a number in mind. I would say anything more than 10 or so makes it a little more cumbersome. But if the final answer is 12, I'm okay with 12, right?
Okay.
I don't have an answer for you there, Charlie.
Okay. Second question is, let's say we end up with whatever zoning and a jurisdiction is in that zoning, can this new code have something that is below the requirements of that local jurisdiction? Or does every new zone have to exceed every jurisdiction for every criteria in that zone?
That is my question.
That was the proposal that we were moving forward with, is that a unit designed for zone 2 might be overbuilt for one jurisdiction or another, but it would not be underbuilt for everything in that zone, right?
Okay. So really, so is that set in stone, Sam, or is that flexible?
Well, it's set in statute that we have to consider the strictest local criteria when we set the zone.
Okay. Well, do you have to consider it or do we have to meet it?
Yeah, thank you. That's a big difference.
That's a really good
So let
question.
me jump in here really quick, folks.
Thank you, Megan.
Things, sorry, I've been listening, just not as actively. So there was a big political barrier we had in passing this bill, and that locals were very concerned about us putting together restrictions that didn't take into account their local needs. So in other words, they wanted to have a really strong influence on any standards that required them to come down in their requirements. So I think, to go back to Mo's point about the role of the consultant, is if we are not doing the highest current statute for them, they have to agree to that. So I just wanted to make sure that that's really clear, because this is something that almost didn't get the bill passed because of that opposition.
Okay, so then so it sounds like we have to meet or exceed every jurisdiction's criteria in each zone.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so then let me offer a suggestion then. It's impossible to create in a committee. Is there a way that we can do an analysis of, I mean, really, we need to do an analysis of every of the 300 and understand what the building criteria is for each one of those, then bundle them together in some logical way. And that needs to probably be a rough draft of how much you want to overbuild per zone, because that's going to be the question. And this is not as, actually, I don't think this is the right way to do it. I think the right way to do it would have been to look at the building criteria that makes sense in each jurisdiction, because every jurisdiction came up with something because something failed 10 years ago and the building department remembers it and they readjusted their code because of that house. Okay, but that, having had that rant for a moment, the way that we have to do this is, if we have to do it by jurisdictional requirement, then somebody needs to go through, categorize them in buckets, and that's the answer. And then all we have to do is decide how big do we want to overbuild for that zone. We could pull these if we wanted to go 60.
Charlie, this is exactly what we wanted this feedback for, because in the early days of this bill, if you remember, we were talking philosophically about, if we have to overbuild, is there still some economies of scale? And I got, yes, probably, but we have to get into specifics. So to get to Mo's point in the chat, this is exactly what we're having the consultant do. We've done some like back of the napkin stuff so far, but I think the feedback that would be most helpful for you all once we take that first stab is the overbuilding too much in aggregate? You know, like, what is the right mix that is going to achieve this bill's goal of lowering costs and getting economies of scale? And I think that's really where we need you all to weigh in on whether it is the right balance to achieve that objective.
Yes, and so I think what you just said is exactly right. We need to understand what those requirements are, what makes sense as buckets, and then the people who are doing it, the architects, the engineers, need to look at that and say, is that a big enough size bucket so that you're getting some economies of scale with production? Because you're going to be overbuilding, and will the amount and the ability to scale offset the overbuilding cost?
Exactly right. Yep, exactly right.
And
so again, I mean, we could have 100 meetings like this and all argue different reasons, but if it all comes back to the fact that we have to meet the local jurisdiction's criteria, then we've got a massive research project to do.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree with you, Charlie, and that's where we're trying to get to, and that's why I like to start I like seeing these creative juices flow now as everybody starts to understand the complexity that we're going to be going through. I want to run through people with their hands up real quick, and then I want to give some examples with wind and snow load that we've also thought about as discussion points. Don?
I've been listening for a while and I think we're maybe want to look at attacking this from a different angle. Because
Okay.
ICC has already done the work for us. And so we're trying to create all these regions. Why don't we create the regions based on climate zones? Right? We got the climate zones because you got to remember that it's just not based on the thermal envelope of the building. I see a lot of mistakes made by design professionals based on climate zones because they don't understand the requirements under the roof ventilation. As we brought up, the MEP designs, everything. ICC has already done all the work for us. They've created climate zones. So why don't we look at creating regions based on the climate zones? That from a liability standpoint, we're meeting all the requirements that the code council has decided need to be addressed for each specific climate zone. If we make our regions based on the climate zones, then we know we're getting the right roof ventilation. We know we're getting the right MEP designs. We're getting the right calculations. We're getting the right build holistically through the whole code. We can't just look at the climate zones based on just the thermal envelope requirements. That's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more involved with building based on zones, and ICC has already done all the brain damage. Then we design our regions based on our climate zones, and then we can go back, okay, let's look at all the snow loads in a zone 7. Let's go look at a region, and we can call it a region 7. We don't even have to change it. We can make it work with the code. I'm in a region 7, I'm in a climate zone 7. I think ICC has done a lot of this for us. And if we want to start thinking about the liabilities of the state creating own, we need to ensure that meeting all the requirements of this climate zone.
Don, can I ask you a
Maybe we're
question?
just
What I understood, and maybe Mo can speak to this, so if a jurisdiction, that climate zone has some ramp out there requirement, they have a snow load that says, can we not pull that? Because
not a HUD up here in the road, even after about 40 years when they completely rot away because they had no roof ventilation. And it's because they didn't rot it because they didn't have enough ventilation for condensation control, right? So I think if we stick with those thermal zones, climate zones is actually what the code says. Those climate zones, they've looked at all of the requirements that they need for that type of climate. If we try to stick with what the code's saying, and I think it's going to make it a lot easier for the builders too. Like, hey, a region 7 is a zone 7. We can set the max snow load. And, is a 100-pound snow load going to be enough for every jurisdiction in the zone 7? But then we can break that down into smaller pieces, smaller problems to solve and look at it. I think if all manufactured homes coming into Summit County say, hey, we ran an analysis, we feel like 80 pounds is adequate. Is the house going to collapse? Probably not, right? We have to look at is we become under a little bit in certain regions, like, hey, Quandary Village, yeah, that might not be great up there. But if you look at all the zone 7s in the state and say, what are your max snow loads? What are your lowest snow loads? And come up with something reasonable that's pretty close, then I think we're going to be a lot closer to creating a region that not only meets the ICC requirements for that region, but I also agree. Like, why are we trying to create something that's going to work in La Junta, that's going to work for the same construction in Breckenridge? That's
Don,
but
what
we're
I
trying to create these regions, right?
But what I just heard was that we have to meet or exceed every local jurisdiction's requirements. And so if somebody in zone 6 says, I want 160-pound snow load, then we can't go by zones. Is that what I understand? And maybe Mo can step in.
You may end up with that, but I don't think you're going to find someone in a zone 6 that has that high of snow load. I mean, Steamboat, I think they're maybe in a zone 6 and they have a really high snow load. But, you know, I'm just like, are we attacking this? Are we making this problem more complicated than it needs to be? Should we be, you know, developing regions based on climate zones and then finding the problems with that and working that problem out for each region based on the climate zone, instead of trying to throw the same climate zone? Because again, it's just not it's just not the table that Donnie put up there. That's
Yeah.
great. But if you read through the code, there's a whole bunch of areas that talk about climate zones, right? And if you're in one climate zone, you do it this way, and you're in another climate zone, you do that way. We're trying to make sure that we're getting homes as close to code as possible in a simplified way for the builders to build it. You know, when you start going through the Summit County amendment package, you know, yes, there's a lot of specific things for wildfire hazard mitigation. The state solved that. They're making us they got their own code now. Everybody's jumping over to that. But you're going to find that you got a lot of little things that are like amendments for fireplaces, unvented heaters, and so on. I think if you start looking at a regional code based on climate zones, you're going to find the similarities in those climate zone areas, and those jurisdictions are going to be very similar to each other. Whereas compared, if you're going to throw in let's do it all to climate zone 7, but now you're going to be someone down in a climate zone 4 that said, none of this makes sense. So why don't we develop that as a region that uses climate zone 4, and then it's all going to fall into place a lot smoother. I'm just throwing that out as an idea.
But Don, again, the question is,
Charlie, how about this? I'll just jump in and I'll answer your question because okay, let's just simplify this. I have to agree with Donna's thing first and foremost. I'm not going to say if that's exactly the place to start, but it makes sense. Is somebody talking? If you're not talking, can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. But anyway, going back to what Don said, you know, if we can ground ourselves at the base of it with the IECC, then I think it does simplify it, and then go from there. To answer your question, Charlie, you know, ideally, a region, everybody would agree on something that's not so stringent that's a problem, right? But if there's somebody that has requirements that are more, we have those conversations, to Don's point, right? We can say, we've investigated through this group these handful of jurisdictions that seem very similar. Some of you appear to be outliers. We'd like to talk to you about why, right? Does it make sense for you to have these requirements? Would you accept something lower, right? Based on the study that we've done with like jurisdictions, right? So it's going to require a conversation. The whole idea behind the bill is this going to be, nobody's going to be forced to do something they're not comfortable with. Us as a state, right? For this product type, and the local jurisdictions who have to deal with them once they're installed in their jurisdiction, right? There's going to be some compromise here that has to happen, right? And that's why the language is written the way it is. We have to account for it, but ultimately we're the ones that are creating it for the state and for those regions, if that makes sense. But we have to get that consultant on board to do that study that we talked about, that you also mentioned, Charlie. You had the same idea that we had, which is why the consultant was put into the bill as well. Not into the bill, but in the fiscal note for the bill. They're going to have to do that study, start grouping, right, in a way that makes sense, and having those conversations.
So let me ask you this. So ideally, why can't we go by zones then? Climate zones that goes to the ICC that has, this is what it is to build in that climate zone as required by the ICC or IRC. And then who does it match and who is outside of that in the climate zone? Because then if 90% of the people it matches and only 10% doesn't, then you only have to talk to 10% of the groups in that. But I love the idea if we could stay with that same climate zone for everybody. But I guess that's why I was trying to understand if it's a requirement that exceeds everybody in the new zone. And maybe Dean or somebody who does this all the time can speak to it. But if it's already been written and it matches the requirements and only a few people are outside of it, then that gets us way down the road.
Well, and that's what we're looking for, is things that'll get way down the road. So
yeah, We totally agree, Charlie. We want to keep this as simple as possible, and that's ideally the conditions we find ourselves in, is starting with the ICC, with the climate zones. That's what we, quite frankly, envisioned a long time ago. But we didn't want to force that issue. It has to come from you guys to give us some direction and ideas on where to start, right?
How many climate zones in Colorado?
I'm sorry, what's that, Charlie?
How many climate zones in Colorado?
There are four.
Four.
We covered them. 4, 5, 6, and
5,
7.
6, and 7.
Yeah, 4 is just a handful in the southeast part of the state. The vast majority are 5, 6, and 7.
Can we just start there and say, here's our recommendation, go by the IRC?
Unless someone has a different idea, we would like to start there.
Well, the better.
If someone has a better idea, we'd love to hear it.
Well,
That's the whole point of this conversation, right? Is to hear from everybody, Charlie.
Okay, so I would say that when you're marketing this to people who are having to accept it, it's way better to say, this is the IRC that's already been tested multiple thousands of times versus my opinion or Nate's opinion or Dean's opinion. It'd be way easier to market to saying, it's already a national code. No one's going to get hurt by using this. And I'll shut up now.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. Mo, did you have anything else to add? I want to catch Cam because he's been putting some good stuff in the chat too.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. Cam, welcome.
Thanks. Sorry I was late. I had a conflict. Hey, I just want to say a cautionary tale. State of California under the IECC has 4 zones. I think 4 zones. And they did a process similar to this a couple decades ago and ended up with 16 climate zones. So please don't follow the pathway of California. If we did, because we have to go confusion between California's code zones and IECC zones, because IECs still exist and they're still on the maps. So I think you're on the right track here with Don's suggestion of using the IECC as a basis and then the big buckets and then go from there to break it down into smaller regions. I think that's genius.
Thank you. Yeah, that anybody that's dealing with bad examples or difficult, challenging examples out there, please let us know because we don't want to get to that. Mo, is your hand still up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, still up. Sorry.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go back to sharing my slides. I want to talk about a couple things through, and we're at 11:30, and I want to make sure I'm respectful of everybody's time as we move this thing forward. This is the kind of discussion that I was hoping for. I do appreciate everything that you guys have been saying, and give me just a second. So if we look at this, the other thing that we talked about as a discussion point was to take a look at the, not as a map, right? Our first intent was, yeah, let's cut the state into 9 sections and run all the climate zones for that. But you run all the design criteria based on 9 sections, right? Front Range, Eastern Plains, mountains, and Western Slope. And that doesn't work, right? Because of the unique factors and geography in the state of Colorado. So we took the map discussion out of it. If we can't do it by a geographic map, can we look at design criteria maybe on wind and snow load? And we already talked about using climate zones to maybe be the base, and then lay on top of that the different climate zones, right? Maybe the base is what we currently require with 30 PSF snow load and 115 wind speed, right? And maybe see how much of the state falls into that. Zones 2 to 4 could increase the snow load and the wind speed incrementally and cover the rest of the state. And then zone 5 could be site specific in the zone for unique and extreme local requirements that are a little more difficult to take a look at. So that was another way to look at it. And so and this is probably not the best example, but you know, what if, but it goes to what Charlie was talking about and some of the other folks were talking about with the strictest requirement, right? Let's say unincorporated Lincoln County is in climate zone, or is in a zone that we come up that we're going to call zone A, right? But the town of Lyman doesn't fit that same design criteria, right? So they may have to be in zone B. And then any place, and there may be there's other little islands or hot spots around that you can still have the same resulting plans. For you have everything in zone A, you can put any place in the state that is covered by zone A. Zone B, you can hit Lyman or wherever else that it may be more restrictive, a stricter design criteria. Zone C, zone D, zone E, and then kind of taking into account that where you could move them from place to place, but there are some challenges and opportunities with that, right? And so I want to jump to my next slide where we look at these challenges and opportunities going forward. Nate, I'm going to check the chat here real quick. Nate, you mentioned something about proposing general zones. Yes, we had talked about in the wildfire discussions requiring or asking the locals to provide us with any updated fire maps. I guess we could also do that for other design criteria also. And we'll throw that out to the consultant to consider. But here's some of the challenges if you look at my this slide. The challenge for what we've been talking about is that it's not a map-based solution, right? So we're still going to have to look up site-specific information, and you're going to have to know where that unit is going, and which you would still have to do on the border of any of the on a say a quadrant type of solution. You're still going to have to look up exactly where that unit's going to go to figure out what it is, right? And again, we've not worked out sprinklers, structure hardening, and radon yet, right? And so it might be something for sprinklers and structure hardening and radon that there's it's site specific, and we take a look at you know, yes sprinklers, no sprinklers, right? In our solution. And then the opportunities here, of course, it may be better from a cost perspective if you have a smaller number of zones that you can have approved plans on from the manufacturer's perspective, but it may require a little more digging into what the local conditions are. And we also thought about there are certain jurisdictions in the state that have multiple design criteria, right, for wind and snow. Denver, we know, has 2, I think. Boulder has 3 or 4. And Pikes Peak Regional Building Authority, I think, has 3 or 4 different sets of design criteria. So we've got to factor that in too. Does that make sense to everybody? Again, this is not our recommendation. This is open for discussion. Okay. And we've talked a little bit about our code consultant that we are looking at hiring. We did put a directed quote out, request for bids out there. We received 3 bids, and we're looking at proposals. We shared that information widely. It went out to the TAC. It went out to the Colorado chapter of the ICC. It went to the Colorado Energy Office and other interested parties. And we were very happy that we got 3 good bids, and we're taking a look at those, and hopefully we'll have them online very, very soon. Cam, you got your hand up?
Sorry, my comment was on your last slide, but I couldn't find the lower hand button, so sorry about that.
That's okay. I can go back.
at the risk of learning from California, I apologize for throwing that risk into the conversation here. Let me just explain, and this might help us learn a little bit more. So state of California does a lot of things wrong, but they do a lot of things right too, in terms of modular. And one thing that they've done, and this might be helpful for our discussion, they were, instead of trying to group all of the snow loading and seismic and exposure into large regions like we talked about, they did their own climate zones, like I said earlier. But one thing they've done to try and streamline modular in that state is they've got all the building codes at state level, and they exclude local amendments. So state adoption is what everybody goes by in modular offsite construction for state of California. The only thing that they allow the locals to do is to apply snow load, wind load, the seismic, the things that we're talking about here. So that's a different approach for a different result. What Colorado's talking about doing is creating zones where all the codes of all the local amendments are considered, and then they're grouped. So there's two different approaches here. I'm not sure which one's better, because if I had to, just knowing how I've operated, we operate in 9 Western states, and knowing if I had to build to the worst seismic code in California, if it and a nearby snow load zone that's just up the mountain that's in the same region, I'd probably have a really unaffordable building. And so I really like the fact that I can just go to the local seismic and snow loading there. And I also like that I don't have all the local amendments to deal with when I go to California. I only have to worry about the criteria we're talking about. So that's, I don't know if that's helpful or not. I don't want to derail the conversation and change the direction. I do think it's important to know that that's what's in place, and it does have some benefits.
Cam, that's very helpful, especially as we look at a starting point. We should also maybe look at the ending point maps and say, wow, this one is going to be a really tough nut to crack, right? Because it is so complex. Dean?
Yeah, kind of to riff off what Cam was talking about, and we also do business in California. Mike, I'm struggling here because in California, it seems to me that they took statutory control at the state level over the local jurisdictions and said, this is just the way it's got to be. In Colorado, our approach is more, well, we need to work with the local jurisdictions and make sure we're meeting all of their most restrictive criteria, each individually. It makes my brain hurt when I think about just how rapidly individual jurisdictions actually change their code adoption and make amendments and things like that. Cam made a point about how there just aren't amendments. Like, you just can't do that, because if a local jurisdiction has amendments, it throws all of this kind of sideways. And if they decide to make an amendment next Tuesday, what does that mean to a manufacturer who is already scheduling a project that was going on the line? Then we're starting to talk about grace periods for various changes for jurisdictions that are within these zones. Maybe a jurisdiction winds up in zone A, but now they're in zone C because they adopted a new amendment, this year, but not last year and not next year. I just don't know how we control that. That's an administrative hurdle that I'm guessing California had to address and said, yeah, we just need to take statutory control over this and make the rules at the state level, regardless of what the local rules are. I'm not stating that's as a direction we need to go or anything like that. I'm just pointing out that this thing is, we're talking about codes as if it's a static case, and it's not. It's anything but a static case. It's always changing.
Thanks, Dean. Sam?
Yeah, being a ex-Californian, I've been here 26 years, but I was there 50. And they have always been, for site built and for manufactured, it's a state code. And when I came here, that was very difficult for me. Every jurisdiction has a different, a lot of them very different codes and stuff, very close. I mean, over here where we are, I mean, the county and the village, Mountain Village, have different codes than we do, where we can throw a baseball and hit them. So things are changing a little bit with the state, with the wildfire resiliency code and the new Colorado low energy and carbon code. I would love to see the state of Colorado go to a more homogeneous code statewide. Maybe this is, I mean, for them, for the legislator to ask this committee to do this, I mean, maybe it should come from a little even higher than this committee. I don't want to muddy it, but it is awfully hard to do. You're fitting a big square peg in a small round hole. But thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that perspective. And we are starting to see some of those things with the Colorado Energy Code and the Wildfire Resiliency Code too. So, but I'm not sure there is anything on the table to change to limit the locals there. You know, there's a lot of states back east too that have a single building code, similar to what I think we're talking about that California has. Mo?
Yeah, thank you for all your great comments. You know, as Megan mentioned earlier, a lot of compromise went for this bill to pass, right? So if that compromise didn't happen, this bill may not have passed at all. We may not be having this conversation at all, talking about this opportunity, first and foremost. Secondly, Dean, I just want to clarify something. I do agree with you to a point, and that is up until July 1st of next year. Or sorry, yeah, July 1st of next year. After that, it is static. After that, it's what this group came up with that was adopted by the State Housing Board that went into effect on or before July 1st of 2026. It is locked in at that point, period. Yep. End of story. The complication is going to be between now and July 1st, right? But once this something has been adopted and it's becomes effective, that is it. They can change whatever they want to change the next day. It has zero bearing on what's going to be applied for offsite built construction or any other product type that's regulated through the statewide program, period.
That's
So
great to know.
clarifies.
That's kind of a game-changing piece of the equation for sure.
Absolutely. Yep. It doesn't take away from the great challenge we have before us between now and then, of course, right? But please know that it is a statewide code at that point, period, on July 1st and on.
Thanks, Mo. Charlie, do you have one other comment?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like how can we move forward? Because if we understand what are the requirements and what we're allowed to do, then I can try to start seeing what the next things are. And so if it's that we have to exceed every jurisdiction, then that takes us in one direction. If we can go with the IRC for the climate zone and just see who is exempt from that, that takes us in another next step direction. And then the question back to Mo is let's say we're going to go by climate zones and that's our recommendation. And there's 3 people in that climate zone that have some random building code. Do they have to accept that come July 1st of next year, or can they exempt themselves out of this? So,
we could, Charlie, we could always put them in zone X, right? There could be some extreme locations that are just too radical, but I don't think we're at that point yet. I don't want to predict what that looks like, but we will have to consider that as we look at our zones.
Yeah, Sam's spot on, Charlie. We'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. But the idea is, if we see some outliers and it makes sense for them to be grouped with others, and then that's when we have a conversation with them, right? I think that was raised earlier by somebody else. They may say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. We're okay accepting this, or they may not. And if they want to be, that stringent, then we have to cross that bridge about whether or not we're carving them out to be a different zone.
So
Yeah, and
let me ask-
remember, we're trying to level the playing field for factory-built structures in Colorado. So those extreme locations, they're still going to be requiring the on-site construction to be built to that same extreme, right? I want to make sure we leave room for our factory-built program to have product in that in that Zone X, right?
So can I ask Dean a question? Dean, if we just went by the IRC climate zone requirements, what do you see the problems with that other than certain jurisdictions having different pieces?
Well, it'd be sort of like a decision tree, right? Like, so, and I think it was in the thread, the chat thread, it was kind of described like this, which I think makes some sense. However, I'm just concerned about how many different levels of the tree we create. So if level 1 is climate zone, then that creates a distribution with four chunks. Then within that, we can say, okay, wind shear values or snow load, or probably not going to be some combination of the two, because we don't find our highest wind zones necessarily in our highest snow load zone areas. But regardless, there's going to be a tier 2 that splits those 4 into maybe 8. And then there's going to be another tier that splits that 8 into maybe 16. And then so how many tiers do we have, and how many permutations do we have at each tier? If we can limit it to 2, then it's like that checkerboard game. If I doubled my penny every checker, board, by the time I get to the end, I get to like millions of dollars of pennies. We just have to be super, super careful about that. And the real wild card here is the new the WUI interface and the fire zone maps, because that also creates another level that we have to consider with structure hardening. And I think that one's easy. It's either going to have a low or a high structure hardening requirement, but it just creates another level. So in the sidebar chat, I think Mo had posted the primary ones, and it was wind shear, snow load, wildfire risk, climate zone, radon mitigation. I might remove that one and just say mitigate everything, or automatic. So now we got 5 levels. If that branch is going to get pretty big pretty fast, I guess.
The problem gets to be, you get 16 zones, you've got no efficiencies of scale. Like, the purpose of this was to get efficiencies of scale for the factories to get lower priced housing. So we can build, you get 16 for Colorado. Yeah, you lose the purpose of this exercise.
Yeah. I think we have to couple some of these. Can we couple wind shear and snow load? I'm not sure that we can. We've tried that before, and it's hard to do, but maybe in this analysis that the consultant goes through is like, oh, I am seeing a relationship between snow load and climate zone. Okay, well, maybe snow load and climate zone becomes one level, and then wind shear and fire mitigation might become one level, because where you have higher winds, you have higher fire risk, right? Like, there may be some relationships there that are just hard to see at face value, that a thorough analysis of, if we could put all of these criteria into a bucket. I mean, in my head, it'd have to be a supercomputer of some sort, or maybe AI, I don't know, that can like go through all of this information and find these relationships to say, hey, we can couple this, and this, and zero. And kind of, Charlie, what you talked about before, like if we can look at these things and say, well, if this group of design criteria kind of always appears in 50% of the time, well, then that's a zone, right? But that's a super heavy lift.
Thanks, Dean. Nate, you
Real
found
quick,
the
real
raise
quick,
your hand button.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to say Dean is spot on. And Nate, congratulations. You finally figured it out after an hour and 50 minutes.
Well, I think somebody raised it for me because I still haven't figured it out. So the success of this depends upon our ability to convince the outliers that they are in fact outliers and should be brought into a larger group of similar type jurisdictions. If we look at this from the standpoint of, if nobody is going to allow a reduction in their local, snow load, wind load, all those things, by the time we get done designing this, we're going to be back to exactly where we are today, which is where we have, we're building basically to these, customized codes for each place. We won't, and so like, I guess that's like, for me, I want to talk about like, what do we actually think the chances are that when we identify the 32 different counties or jurisdictions that have some sort of goofy outlier code requirement on one of these items, that we're going to get them all to willingly jump into whatever bucket we say that they should be in from a region standpoint. If we think there's a good chance of that through studies and through the consultant, I think we have a shot of actually doing something kind of truly unique in Colorado. If we don't have a shot at that, we're going to end up right back where we're at today. And the one thing I do want to add for Ken is like, we do kind of have state jurisdiction over modular in Colorado, even though we're home rule. So we do have a statewide code. We don't allow the local amendments on the modular side. We just go basically duck out to the locals for the snow, wind, seismic data points, and then incorporate those in our statewide code.
Yeah, that's a good
True,
point.
because I feel like I've gotten comments that I need to adhere to a local jurisdiction's amendments.
Nope. They might say that, but from a state standpoint, you do not.
Yeah, for example, we are in the 2021 IECC. If the locals tell you you have to build your unit to the 2024 ICC, tell them no. Or 2024 IRC, the answer is no. You build it to the code set that we have adopted and amended, right? There are local jurisdictions that are on the 2015 IRC. Doesn't matter. You're going to still have to build to the 2021 IRC that we have approved and amended.
That
But
also
those local design criteria, the wind, snow, sprinklers, and wildfire mitigation now that we do defer to the locals, and now we're trying to group those into a bigger picture. Mo, and then Donnie, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Yeah, Cam, sorry, I probably created some confusion by some of the language I used before. We already have statewide codes, to Nate's point. There were just some exceptions in statute, which we're now closing the loop on through this new statute. These handful of code requirements now, once we come up with our requirements through the statewide program, and they go into effect by July 1st, now we have a comprehensive code set that they have to comply with. If you were getting any jurisdiction, first of all, they cannot be doing a re-review of your plans that have already been approved by the state, right? And charging for you that's actually legal in law. So you should definitely bring those examples to us. If they push back on any requirement that's under the jurisdiction of the statewide program, you should be letting us know about that as well. So we can have those conversations. Donnie and Sam should then be reaching out to those jurisdictions and saying, hey, you may not be aware of this. We have a statewide program. Here's a statute that gives us authority here. We supersede your requirements. And this new bill 002 goes into greater detail about that, actually. So if you don't have a copy of the bill, you should keep that handy and provide that to whatever local jurisdiction, because they have staff coming in and out. There's turnover there, and so the new person or the new team may not be aware of these requirements. So on occasion, we do have to revisit it with them. So do not hesitate to provide the law yourself, or reach out to our team to have those conversations with them. Going back to what Nate said earlier, though, we're creating anxiety over something we don't know yet, right? So this is a bit early to have those conversations, in my humble opinion. Let's be positive and optimistic here. Once again, this bill provides an opportunity, doesn't provide a magic bullet by any means, right? Let's find out who these outliers are and have the jurisdictions, have those conversations with jurisdictions. If anything, this work will shine light on them. We can have other ways of having conversations with them. If the building department itself won't have a reasonable conversation with us about potentially changing the requirements based on data we have presented to them, we have to provide political pressure. We'll apply political pressure, right? But there's a variety of ways to have these conversations with them. First and foremost, they're partners. We want to bring them along. We want to bring them along in a way that makes sense for them and us, right? And that's going to be grounded in data first and foremost, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Mo. Donnie, you got one last comment before I wrap this up?
Yeah, just real quick, and there's a lot of good ideas that have been thrown out today, and I think it would be good if you can send those ideas in a more formal way to Sam and I to look over, so that we can actually put this stuff together for a slide. Because, like, you know, the idea about just doing thermal zones, right, or climate zones, how does that look, right? Can you show us how that looks and how that would be broken down? And so that we can all see, like, how do we do a climate zone that meets all of the, or not all, but how do we categorize that climate zone so that it accounts for maybe regions of snow zones and regions of wind zones, right? You know, can you send that to us so that we can actually put it on a slide? Because right now visually it's hard to do that because the code book's this thick, right? And so how do we put that together? So if you could send that to us, that'd be great. And then also to Tracy's point earlier of you know, building to a certain standard that they currently do and how it you know, should meet the current codes. Can you possibly maybe redo that study that you did with the res check you and Robbie put together, right? Maybe not work on it together now because you guys are both TAC members, but maybe if you can run that on your own, a mock-up of a tiny home, and see if it passes a res check, and if it does, you know, send that to us and show us how that passes. And if it doesn't, but it comes close, what do we need to do to tweak it to meet that? Because that could be a minimum standard for a tiny home. Like, hey, this is a known way to pass the res check for a tiny home, and it might not be the prescriptive method, but we've been able to do some trade-offs here to make this work, and this is how we made it work, right? If you can send that to us, and again, we can look at it and put it on the slide so that everybody can visually see, like, hey, this is how it's working, so that we can discuss it.
Yep.
Okay.
So thanks, Donnie. If you guys can send us comments while it's you're still passionate about this, and we would love to get those comments, and we'll put those together, and we'll also certainly talk through those comments with the consultant. Just to let you know about the next meeting, any feedback from Rulemaking 1 we'll let you know about, and then we'll continue the discussions on Rulemaking 2. And the next meeting is September 17th from 9 to 11, a little earlier in the day. And that's all I have. Anybody else have any final thoughts before I give you 2 minutes back to your day? All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. I really do. We'll get there. This is the kind of discussion that I was hoping we would get out of this. This helps us, and I intend to try to help you guys out. So thank you very much for your time. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.